Africa, Africa, Africa must be free, Africa must unite, total liberation for the continent now. Africa, Africa, Africa must be free, Africa must unite, total liberation for the continent now. Total liberation for the continent now. Total liberation for the continent now.
Africa, my beginning. Africa, my roots. Africa, dawn of time. Tell me about Timbuktu. Tell me about Gao. Tell me about Jenne, Zimbabwe. Ghana, where gold shone like a midday sun. Africa, my Egypt means time. My Lumumba means love. My Casper means struggle.
Soweto calls your name. Remember Sharpeville? The thud of an untamed stone on the red neck of a boar. Remember the jerk of sniper bullets biting deep in the crowd. At Nyanga, at Langa, at Pondoland, at Utene. Africa, my tire necklace wrung the traitor's neck. Africa, my yelling Nemo, you washed your soul at the Battle of Nsamanko and defied Italian sniper fire at Adowak. Oh, Africa, from the depths of a famine bowl, I call your name. Through the hail of bullets of a Soweto midnight song, I feel your heart.
Africa, my beginning. Africa, my roots. Africa, dawn of time. Can you hear the sounds of Chimurenga? From Toronto to Alabama, Port Rupert to Burkina Faso, from Rio de Janeiro to Auckland, from Brisbane to Senegal, your children call you Mama. Africa, my beginning. Africa, my roots. Africa, dawn of time. Can you hear the sounds of Chimurenga? The pounding of the Zambezi as it unfurls towards Tanzania. Africa, my Izandwana. Africa, my AK-47. From Cape to Cairo, I trail the path of freedom. I dance bare feet in a brigade of thundering guns, ready to stretch the landscape on our palms, set ablaze the winds of despair.
I once saw your name written on a wall in Manhattan. Down there in Mississippi, they remember you too, young as ever. Africa, my simmering voice in trench town. I feel corrugated iron melt on wooden Nyanga. Your children disappear in Atlanta, yet you were on a long, long, long march to Maputo.
Oh, Africa, the oceans still roar lessons written in blood upon the angry waves. The winds carry the echoing rattle of a screaming chain. A black body leaps desperately overboard to quench the burning thirst for freedom. Oh, Africa, those who died along that journey survive in me. They told me lies,
White lies, blonde lies, blue-eyed lies.
They said the primeval curse touched your darkened brow. Cain, Abel, they've tarred your name. The survivors of that painful journey have learned to unlearn the story of our shame, to learn the truth of our history's strength. We know well you were the land of Pharaohs. The mighty Nile blessed you thus. We have learned to unlearn the drummed-in story of the greatness of the conqueror, to answer to the sound of our own drums again.
From Ghana, from Senegal, from Nigeria, from the black heart of our America, from the Caribbean chain, a people made stronger by painful lessons learned. The cries of despair that once divided us across the oceans, now triumphant shouts of the self-reclaimed. In Nani of the Fighting Maroons, Harriet Tubman, Ya Asantewa, the searching life of Malcolm X, in Marcus Garvey's shout.
They say your children swing from trees. True. In Mississippi, in Alabama, as the KKK steals through the night. Africa my beginning, Africa my roots, Africa dawn of time. I live and shape your dreams of freedom in the lands where I've always been, in the lands to which I've been taken, in the lands to which I've taken the sweat of my labor. Africa my beginning, we know that stones won't stop kindness, but we've killed the fear in us. Africa my beginning,
Africa my roots,
Africa dawn of time,
Africa my beginning,
Africa my roots,
Africa dawn of time,
Africa my beginning,
Africa my roots.
Africa dawn of time.
Liberation. What is the role of language in African liberation? 5.5 decades on from what is described as the African Liberation era, it might be useful to assess how effective the liberation project has been in wresting control of the continent from alien colonizers. In the early part of the era, one of its leading lights, Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, warned of the dangers of neocolonialism, which she described as, quote, the state, which is subject to it, is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from the outside. The above description also highlights where the emphasis on African emancipation tends to lie, politics and economics. Yet, renowned scholar Professor Kwesi Prah asserts that language is, quote, the missing link in African development, unquote. Language as an aspect of culture has frequently been an underplayed aspect of the liberation discourse. Previously, it was the near exclusive domain of literary circles debating, as was the case famously between Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, whether European language could be the vehicle for cultural affirmation and even liberation. One of the main reasons cited for the de-emphasis on language was that Africa presented such a classic example of the proverbial Tower of Babel, with too many languages, estimates between 700 and 2,035 to give it any serious consideration. However, work by Professor Prah at the Center of Advanced Studies of African Societies, or CASAS, has so far revealed that over 75% of Africans speak no more than 13 core languages. These being Nguni, Sotho, Tswana, Swahili, Amharic, Fulfulde, Mandenkan, Igbo, Hausa, Yoruba, Ijao, Luo, Eastern Interlaxarine, and Western Interlaxarine, or Runyakitara. Nice, beautiful African word, kings and queens. Runyakitara languages, kings and queens. This rises to 85% if 3 more core languages are added. Factored into this is the phenomenon of most Africans on the continent being multilingual. The gaping chasm between 13 to 16 and 2,035 languages could be put down to classification. It has been described as a missionary crusade to discover new languages. When what was actually discovered, Professor Prah contends, are actually dialectical variants of core languages. The implications of this for the continent are far-reaching. Quote, in as far as African development is concerned, the upshot of these facts are that the harmonization of African languages, which show high levels of mutual intelligibility, would greatly facilitate the economies of scale in the development of educational, media and cultural materials, which could go a long way towards strengthening the basis for society for the cultural and social development of Africa. Furthermore, it is the only way of culturally empowering the masses of African society. It is the one way we can remove the cultural cleavage between the elite and mass society. It provides the key to the methodology of eradicating the stigma of inferiority which the colonial experience has invested in African languages, unquote. From a developmental point of view, one consequence of this would be to elevate African languages to the language of instruction, i.e. the main language for government education at all levels, science and technology, business and social intercourse, studies in Africa, as well as evidence of how this can aid development and or political mission has been seen in places such as Southeast Asia, for example Malaysia, Indonesia and Vietnam, or even the Anglo-Boers in Azania, or the old Soviet Union. We'll delve into that later on, kings and queens. Such an undertaking would be an immense structural task, and Professor Prah notes that, quote, all African governments theoretically agree with this view, unquote, but with the predictable caveat, quote, hardly any are able or willing to devote the requisite resources for the realization of such objectives. Mother tongue education does not feature anywhere near the top of their priorities. This begs the question, where are other means to advance This begs the question whether there are other means to advance this program other than through linguistically diffident governments who are reluctant to demote or eschew colonial languages out of a personal preference or misguided economic considerations. An additional concern, when considered in the context of Pan-African liberation goal, is how to address the issues of Africans in the diaspora. Unlike Africans on the continent, those in the diaspora are perceived to have a much higher rate of monolingualism, i.e. can only speak one language, and in a European and in a European language to boot. In other words, that language is the one language we speak is a European language. It may help to shatter the illusion that English, for example, is the global power language for the masses, when in fact only 6% of the global population are native English speakers and 75% speak English, no English at all. One approach is to teach them young. For example, in its 10 years of existence, the Alkebu-Lan Academy of Excellence, Saturday School, has always included an African language in its curriculum, previously Twi and currently Yoruba, taught by Mr. Kola, the best Yoruba teacher in London. On another level, there are even spiritual implications for a non-African language of instruction, as pioneering scholar Molefe Keti Ashanti argues, quote, "If your God cannot speak to you in your own language, then he is not your God. Your God is the God who speaks to you in your language. What is your language? It is the language with which you first got your consciousness. Thus, for African Americans, it would be Ebonics. For Yoruba, the language would be Yoruba. For the Ashanti, the language would be Twi. If you want to hear your God in the language of your ancestors, then learn an African language like Kiswahili or Yoruba," unquote. So tonight, Kings and Queens, we are asking the question, what is the role of language in African liberation? Is language really the missing link in African development? Why is Africa characterized as having so many languages? Is a program instituting African languages of instruction economically viable? What evidence is there that the mother tongues language of instruction improves knowledge acquisition? Should Africans in the diaspora learn African languages? Our special guest, as already introduced, is Brother Leader Mbandaka. We also have on the line, joining us from Azania, South Africa, Cape Town to be precise, Baba Kwesi Prah, the founder and director of the Africa-wide Center for Advanced Studies of African Society, based in Cape Town, South Africa. He studied at Leiden University, the University of Amsterdam. He has worked extensively across Accra, Europe, Asia, researching and teaching sociology and anthropology in various universities. Kwesi Prah is currently mainly involved with work in anthropological linguistics, specifically, the harmonization of African orthographic conventions, Kings and Queens. He has a number of titles, and we'll get some of them later on. But for now, let me greet and welcome our elder brother, Baba Kwesi Prah. Are you with us, my brother, my elder?
Yes, good evening. Good evening to you all.
Good evening, Baba Kwesi Prah. Just to let you know, first and foremost, introduce myself. My name is brother Shakara. You've already spoken to Mama Kai, and we are also joined by your co-guest, our resident guest and spiritual leader of the Alkebu-Lan Revivalist movement, Brother Leader Mbandaka, and he would like to greet you also. Tendai Mwari.
Yes, Tendai Mwari, Baba Kwesi. It is an absolute honor to have you on our program, and I just want our listeners to know that we are listening. We are about to hear from a highly esteemed and venerable elder in our midst, who will raise our consciousness and, our understanding of our culture, and in particular the importance of African language and its role in the liberation of our people. We're deeply honored to have you in our program, Baba Kwesi. Tendai Mwari.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Baba Kwesi.
Thank you, and greetings to you too. Greetings to you too.
All right, give thanks, my elder. Right. So, just a quick note for our listeners, bear with us because we're either going to get into the calls very late or not at all. We are, as you might have guessed, we're getting our Baba on a little bit later than scheduled, and we want to, extract as much knowledge and information from him as possible. Now, Baba Kwesi, our question today is, what is the role of language in African liberation? And for many of us, Baba Kwesi, there are the idea that Africa is a continent full of thousands of languages, hundreds existing in each of its 54 states, is an impression or a viewpoint that we are yet, to do away with. So for the sake of our listeners who may not have come across your work or have an understanding of what it represents, can you please explain to us how it is you get to basically group African languages into one of 13 distinct groups? How has your research come to that conclusion?
Yes. Now, it's all rather simple. First and foremost, remember that most Africans are multilingual.
Yes.
Africans who speak one or two languages are a very small minority.
Okay.
Most Africans are multilingual. That's one fact.
That's right.
Now, another point is that most of what are listed in the literature as languages are actually what I call dialectical variants
Right.
of core languages. So in comparison with your situation in the UK, for example, if you say Cockney is different from Geordie or Scouse or Tyneside or somebody from Aberdeenshire speaking,
Right.
that all these variants of English are separate languages,
Okay.
then you would end up in a situation where you have about 30 languages in Britain.
Yes.
You see? Now, this is precisely what has been happening in Africa
Okay.
because of the rivalries and the competition between different missionary groups, each trying to create its own flock. They have written these languages with different spelling systems,
Okay.
often dialectal variants, slight variants. Of course, you can hear when somebody's a Cockney and he speaks and somebody else is from Dublin, speaks English. You can hear that. You can hear that this is an Irishman, this is a man from close to Bow Bells in London or Whitechapel. You can hear that.
Yes.
And you can also write them, what they speak, in such a way that on paper they appear to be different languages
Okay.
because of the slight differences in sounds and pronunciation.
Understood.
But if you go with the rule that structurally the languages which share up to about 80 to 85% similarity,
Right.
and vocabulary, which is about 85% the same, should be written with the same rules of spelling. If you do that, then you would find that quite suddenly, whatever is readable for a Cockney is also readable by somebody from Tyneside.
Right.
It's readable by somebody from Cornwall. You understand what I mean?
Understand. We understand.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a very simple problem. A lot of the languages, what we call languages, separate languages, are not really separate languages.
Okay.
In South Africa, for example, Zulu, what is Zulu as it's called,
Yes.
is Xhosa in South Africa,
Yes.
Siswati in Swaziland and in South Africa, Sindebele in South Africa and Sindebele in Zimbabwe
Yes.
are precisely the same language.
Okay. Yes.
You know, they are just slightly variant. In
Right.
fact, if you take somebody from Matabeleland in Zimbabwe and you bring him all the way to Zululand in South Africa, they will be able to communicate completely,
Right.
even if they are from villages in these two areas.
Yes. Yes.
You see, and yet one of them is called Ndebele, and the other one is called isiZulu, Sindebele, and isiZulu. And Xhosa
Yes.
also can be understood by them.
Okay.
Now, in the case of each of these three I have named, that is isiXhosa, isiZulu, and Sindebele, it is also possible to see, even under them, variants. So that the Xhosa would have about 7 or 8 variants.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You see,
Okay.
Tembu, Pondo, Klubi, and others.
Yes. Yes.
Now, if you start by giving them all different names as different languages,
Yes. Yes.
then suddenly you end up with hundreds of languages.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
You
Okay.
see, this is the problem we have in Africa.
Right. Right.
If you take Sotho Tswana, for example, again in South Africa,
Yes.
it's spoken as Tswana in Namibia, east of Gobabis, towards the border in Botswana. It's spoken in Botswana by about 80 plus % of the population has different varieties of Tswana.
Right.
You see? Now, and then you cross the border into South Africa. There are more Tswana speakers in South Africa than are in Botswana,
Yes.
where they are 80% of the population.
Yes, I've heard that.
You see? And then you go into Lesotho, you find another version of the same language called Sotho. I mean, when a Sotho speaks and a Tswana speaks, they can understand each other.
Yes.
You see? And then you go to Zambia, in Barotseland. It is spoken as Silozi. You see?
Okay.
Now, so you go across Africa and you find the same situation replicated and repeated everywhere.
Right.
Everywhere you go, it's the same situation. Where missionary groups in competition with each other have translated the Bible into these languages with different rules, even for different districts, adjacent districts, which speak practically the same languages, slight different inflections. And then they translate. Another Catholics would do their translation. Somebody else goes 25 kilometers further and says the Protestants from France. And maybe that's another translation of the Bible with different rules, giving different symbols to the same sound.
Okay. So, Baba Kwesi, then, could you, if in your research, in your expertise, what has been the primary impact, or what are the implications of this reality on the social, political, and economic development of Africa? How has the perception of thousands of languages, and also in the context of supposedly European languages becoming the lingua franca of, so to speak, of our nations?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. Because, you see, if you say that there are lots and thousands of languages, then you are saying that because there are so many languages, they cannot be used for any purpose other than poetry and dancing and ritual, etc. That whatever you want to teach people has to be done in the colonial languages.
Right.
This is the rationale. It has become an argument, the so-called Tower of Babel theory. It has become an argument. In fact, it is part of the ideology of the maintenance of a colonial, for the maintenance of a colonial hegemony culturally, linguistically. It's become an argument in the hands of those who do not want or do not expect Africans to work in their own languages.
Yes.
Now, this you must remember that those Africans who speak with any degree of fluency or authority, English, French, Portuguese, or Arabic sometimes, are a very small minority.
Right.
Nowhere do they number more than 10% in each instance.
Okay.
You see, now you cannot ask an African to compete with Shakespeare.
Yes.
It will never work.
Yes.
You see, and Shakespeare's descendants own their language.
Yes.
If you come in to use it, to borrow it, and you think you will be in a position to use it better than them or to be able to compete with them in their own language, you tell yourself a story. You end up actually assimilating
Right.
to their culture.
Okay.
Because a language is a door onto culture. You open a language and you enter a cultural area. You enter a history. You enter the background of a people.
Okay.
You see, you enter their memory, their registration in history. It's all captured and written in language. It's expressed in language.
All right.
You see. Now, if you lose your language and you acquire somebody else's language, then you become somebody else. You see, and this is the cultural instrument of neocolonialism. Therefore, neocolonialism, which then absorbs you into the culture of the dominating power, the metropolitan power.
Right.
You see, that. So this is how it works. This is how it works. Now, what it means also is that you are never in a position to be as optimally creative and inventive in the colonial language, because it's not your language. You're always battling with it, you see. And if you look at the experience of societies around the world, post-colonial societies, there's so much to learn. Look at Asia. Vietnam was a French colony.
Yes.
They don't use French anymore. They use Vietnamese.
Yes.
Korea was a Japanese colony. They don't use Japanese.
Baba Kwesi, can I ask you a question on those two examples that you've given? Yeah, Vietnam and South Korea, as an expression of what you said, their post-colonial era. Yeah, are these nations that had more than one language existing within their borders, and then decided or developed a common language, or did they just always have a common language?
Yes, well, they have more than one language.
Right.
It's just like Africa,
Yes.
They have more than one language. But they have a language or languages which are spoken by me, and they have policies which respect the other languages, You see,
Right.
using a language doesn't mean that you should use one language.
Right.
It means that you must have a dispensation,
Right.
a policy which respects the coexistence of several languages.
Okay.
Look at a country like Switzerland. Switzerland is no bigger than Swaziland.
Yes.
It's a very small place.
Yes.
They use 4 languages. And all these languages, all these 4, are empowered.
Okay.
In fact, one of them is about 2/3 of the population.
Yes.
That's German.
Right.
You see?
Yes, understood.
And then there is French,
Yes.
which is less.
Yes.
And then there is Italian, which is very small.
Okay.
And there's Romansh, which is even smaller.
Right.
You see? And yet, for the democratic practice of the area of the country, these languages have, in principle, the same representation rights.
Mm-hmm.
You see? Now, the key is that in the educational system, you must expose children at the right age to as many languages as possible.
Right.
So that by the time they get to tertiary level, they have working knowledge in many of these languages. In my experience, my own experience in the 60s in the Netherlands,
Okay.
I remember that I was surprised that when you go to lectures, the professor will give you a list of books to choose, some to read, 25 for example. Some of the books in the list will be in English, some in Dutch, some in German, some in French, and you can choose a certain number.
Yes.
Now, it's not because the Dutch are especially gifted with language, but the educational system ensures
Yes.
that by the time you get to university, you've had enough exposure
To different
to a
languages.
number of these languages
Okay.
and are able, therefore, to read and to some degree write in them. Now, if such principles, and these are democratic principles, these
Yes.
are principles of empowerment, of
Right.
opening up the society, of allowing people to relate to each other.
Mm-hmm.
If we do that in Africa, we'll get very, very far.
Okay.
We'll get very far.
All right. We're getting there, Baba. Just so you know, for the sake of our listeners, I'm asking this some preliminary questions, and then we're going to get into the implications of language for science and development, science and technological development, and then we are also going to talk about Arabic. I want to ask Baba about Arabic. We are asking the question: what is the role of language in African liberation, kings and queens? What is the role of language in African liberation? And we are speaking to Professor Kwesi Prah, sociologist, anthropologist, and linguist par excellence, kings and queens. I want you to understand the level of the gem and the jewel that you are hearing on the airways today. Our elder is conducting pioneering work, in African language development, kings and queens. And this is the kind of work that we should be all tuned into and engaged in. Now, the text. We are taking your text, kings and queens, and use the text number call. We may not get to your calls. We may, but we may not. 07508 323 744. That's 07508 323 744 is the number to send your texts in. We are asking the question: what is the role of language in African liberation? Is language really the missing link in Africa's development? Should Africans in the diaspora learn an African language? Are you learning an African language right now, kings and queens? If you are, let us know how that is, what that is doing for you. 07508 323 744. Now, Baba Kwesi Prah.
Yes.
There are some. For many, you mentioned the fact that English, for example, or European languages in general on the continent of Africa are only spoken fluently by a small number of the population. Yeah, and we could go as far as to say that is the elites. What would be the direct implications of African languages dominating the political sphere, the educational sphere, the scientific sphere, the technological sphere in Africa? Would it have a dramatic impact upon the social mobility and economic opportunity of Africans, or would it not really have any impact at all?
Of course, it will make it dramatic. Just imagine if you use a language which all the people understand, or people understand in their villages.
Yes.
The languages they've known and spoken all their lives.
Mm-hmm.
if you teach them everything in their own languages, they'll very quickly, within 10 years, you'll transform the whole of Africa.
Right.
But if you're waiting for the day when you will change every African in the village to speak English like Shakespeare, to compete with Shakespeare in his language, that day will never come.
Okay.
And if that day ever came, they would have long ceased to be African. They would have become Englishmen.
Oh, dear.
Yes. Because it is ultimately not where they live or the color of their skin which determines their culture. It is their culture which determines how they think.
All right, give thanks for that, Baba Kwesi.
So it's very, very important to get a proper handle on the language question.
Okay.
Because it is the only instrument of decolonizing. It is the first and most important instrument for decolonizing people.
Yes. All right. Kings and Queens, I watched the French election recently, and they spoke French. If I watch an election in Germany, they speak German. You know what I'm saying? Spain, same thing, Spanish. All over the African continent, when we're electing presidents and when we're conducting court, we speak English, French, and
Portuguese.
Things. Mad thing, like when recently there was an election in Ghana, and the president, in his acceptance and his inauguration speech, spoke English. And spoke it so well that they were able to identify the fact that he had plagiarized 2 American presidents previously. What a shame, Kings and Queens. But we have a text coming through, so let me get his text and then we'll get back to Baba Kwesi Prah.
If he had spoken in a local language,
they wouldn't have said nothing. They wouldn't have said nothing.
Would know no different.
Yes.
Tendai Mwari.
Texter, Tendai Mwari, brother Tafazo. Greetings to your illustrious guest, Baba Kwesi. This is Brother Mario here in IT.
Hear
him grooving on the show this evening. My question: I consider Haitian Creole to be fully an African language.
Right.
This is based on its genesis as a language forged by Africans, which they used to liberate themselves from enslavement, as well as to evolve a Pan-African culture in microcosm.
Yes.
What is Baba Kwesi's view on this? Thank you and the esteemed elder for your time and effort.
All right.
Mario.
Now, Brother Mario, in true form, has preempted one of the questions that I was going to ask. So I'm going to ask Brother Mario to hold on for the answer to that question. And then we just follow a train of logic and then we'll get to our patois or Creole in the Caribbean shortly. I hope you can humbly be patient with me, Brother Mario. But that is a very important question. And thank you for sending some of the Haitian spirit our way. And we still want Jan out there, we want to come and catch some of that voodoo vibration.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
All right. So
another text that says, an oppressive barbarian will always try to use might beat right. A psychopathic wrongdoer will always think that they are above correction. Some people talk about the powers that be. What is the powers that be? The powers that be is a source of righteousness. All evil works and actions is weak and without strength. Anything with power have to have some association with righteousness. So the powers that be could never be those who represent an evil system or the source of evil. Prince Levi.
Give thanks for that, Prince Levi. All right. Baba Kwesi Prah. Don't worry. We've been speaking about European languages today, and when we were present and awestruck by you when you came over for AOD a few years ago. I want to say to you personally, you totally just blew my head to pieces, and I was very, very inspired by you when you came over for AOD some years ago. But there was a mini debate began at AOD with regards to the role of the Arabs in Africa and also the role of Arabic in the continent. And I know that you firmly...
Let me say quickly something about the Haitian Creole.
No problem. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Before we go further.
All right.
I think, in fact, I don't know if you remember this, but soon after the Second World War, when UNESCO was created, it was suggested by experts that in Haiti, the creole should be used for education.
Yes, yes.
For the country.
Yes.
Now, there were objections raised by the elites to this, you see. And it's most unfortunate because if that had been done, it would have meant an enormous transformation of the society.
Yes.
Because the masses would have been immediately empowered. Some years ago, not too long ago, I visited some of the islands in the Caribbean, and I was amazed by the advancement and the popularity, the ubiquitousness in a place like Curacao of Papiamento, and the consciousness of the people about the fact that Papiamento was virtually on the verge of being adequately developed to be a lingua franca, to be a language empowered with literacy and etc. But again, there you have the diffidence of part of the elite. Now, I think the same thing can be said for, or at least I saw the same thing in Suriname.
Right.
Where they have the Sanantongo.
Yes, yes.
Which most people would understand, but there are competitive voices there. Some people wanting to preserve Dutch.
Yes.
Some wanting to use Hindustani and refusing. But if it's done democratically, in other words, if people are taught these languages at the same qualitative level in the society, 3 or 4 languages, where we learn each other's language, just like the Swiss do, then the society will be uplifted very democratically.
Yes.
So I think in many ways, in fact, what I saw in the Caribbean showed societies which could easily make the transition, because in places like Curacao and Aruba, you could see that Papiamento was so entrenched, so loved, so entrenched, so popular, that with a little bit of effort, it could be moved from basically oral language to a language of science and technology.
But you're going in
now,
the direction. Sorry, Baba.
Let's go now to the question of Arabic.
All right, Baba Kwesi, can I ask you a question in between that, just before we get to Arabic, because it relates to what you just said, yeah? And that is in relation to, because some might argue that our languages have been so as well as our nations have been so underdeveloped over the best part of a century, or more, that it's difficult to translate our languages into languages of instruction because there are no words in our languages to represent certain modern phenomena like computer, microchip, hydroelectricity, you know what I'm saying, and these things. So in your expertise, how does one go about the process of developing these aspects in a language that has been underdeveloped?
Very simple. Very, very simple.
Okay, go ahead.
Listen, there is no language which from Adam was the language of science and technology.
Yes, sir.
Languages become scientific and technologically equipped.
Right.
When societies decide that they want to equip the languages. If you take, for example, the example of one of the languages we have here in South Africa, the language of the Boers, Afrikans.
Yes.
It was first written as a standard language with a fixed spelling system.
Right.
In 1913. The first time.
Just over 100 years ago.
1913. You see, that same year, they took it to primary schools to be used, to write books and to teach. 5 years later, in 1918, it was introduced into universities. 1925, it became a language which you could use in parliament. And in 1933, they translated the Bible into Afrikaans.
Ultimate achievement.
You see? Now, by the mid-30s and the end of the 30s, you could study anything in the world in the language.
Yes, yes, yes.
The same thing can be said for
20 years on.
Bahasa in Indonesia.
Right.
You know, that in a very short time, from about in the mid-40s to the 60s, it became a language in which you could study anything. Or a third example would be modern Hebrew. Also in the space of about 20, 25 years, it was transformed.
Okay.
So any language, there is no language which is incapable of development. But you must want to develop it. There should be the will to develop it. And there should be the purpose, a united purpose to develop it. And then you can develop it. There is nothing special about it.
Yes. All right. Thank you for that, Baba. Okay. We're gonna get onto the Arabic thing now. Just before I do that, let me let you know, brothers and sisters, that Baba Kwesi Prah will be in London on Saturday the 10th of June for the 8th annual Marcus Garvey Memorial Lecture, Kings and Queens. And I promise you, you do not want to miss this man. Yeah, he's an amazing scholar and activist doing some key work for our people's liberation. So yes, Birkbeck University starting at 5 p.m. On Saturday the 10th of June at room B34, Kings and Queens. And yes, unfortunately there's no website you can check out, but we'll try and give you the information again at the end of the show, so do stay tuned. Okay, Baba Kwesi Prah, the issue of Arabic. Now, many people would claim that Arabic is an indigenous African language. Some would claim that the Arabs are indigenous, and that the Afrikan Liberation should factor in the Arabs and the Arabic culture, the Arabic language. And by the way, Kings and Queens, over a third of the African continent speak Arabic as a first language. Yeah. So Baba Kwesi, I was asking you about Arabic and where you place Arabic in your analysis of as in relation to its impact on African people and whether it's indigenous or not to Africa.
The place of Arabic in Africa can easily be understood from its history in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Just in the same way as the role and the place of English can be understood from the history of English in Africa or French in Africa.
Okay.
Any language, you see. Now, the history of Arabic in Africa, you know as well as I do, that Arabic and the culture of the Arab, the entry of the Arabs into Africa in the 7th century AD came by fire and sword. And it came by conquest of the whole of North Africa, you know. And the Arabization of the people of North Africa, most of them before that time were Berber-speaking, Tamazic-speaking peoples, you know, who were Arabized.
Right.
In other words, they stamped out of them the use of their own language and forced Arabic on them. Now, as I told you, if you change somebody's language, you take his tongue out and you stick another tongue in his mouth, and you force him to to change his customs, rituals, beliefs, etc., you change him. He becomes somebody else. You see. In North Africa, you cannot tell the difference between an African and an Arab by looking at the color of the skin. In the Sudan, you can't. In places like Chad, you can't always. In Niger, you can't always. Because color does not show difference. The Arab in Sudan is as black as the African. You know, color is biology. Language is culture. There are two totally different realities. You see, biology is immutable. You were born with it. Culture you learn. You see, and culture is the way. It's the difference between us and animals. You know, humans create culture. We live in culture. We are made by our cultures, but we also make dialectically, we make cultures. And so culture is the important thing. Now, Arabic in North Africa is therefore historically a language of conquest. It's the same situation that you have with French or English. In India you have English. It's a language of conquest.
Yes.
Just like in Vietnam, you had French. It was a language of conquest.
Okay.
But fortunately, the Vietnamese have thrown it out. Now, I am not saying that those that have become Arabs should be stopped from being Arabs. So it is their right, and it has to have the same rights as any other language. But also, all the other languages in Africa have the same rights. So, in other words, don't impose Arabic on Africans and tell them that they must not use their own language. You see, this is what has happened in places like the Sudan.
Yes, yes.
To the point where the Nubians, a lot of the Nubians, are no longer speaking Nubian. They're speaking Arabic. And many of them have even adopted mythologies of origins.
Yes.
Based on Arabic genealogy.
Yeah, supremacy. So, but Kwesi Prah, a question on a supplementary question to the question on Arabic here, and then we're going to get into some of the practical work that you're doing in terms of trying to institute your work, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to open up the lines. But the issue of Swahili, because there is a debate going on as to whether Swahili can be considered an African language or not. Some say it's been infiltrated by Arabic. There are others who say, however, that it has a higher percentage of original Bantu words than a lot of other Bantu languages. Where do you stand in your research on the issue of Swahili as a language?
Now, listen, Kiswahili,
is
eminently a Bantu language. You know, it has a lot of Arabisms. That is true.
Yes.
But it remains in structure and lexicals very much of a Bantu language. You know, very much of a Bantu language. What you can say is that with like many other languages in that latitude of Africa, that is running from the Senegambia right to the east of Africa, there are a number of these languages which have historically used the Arabic scripts in writing. You can use any script to write any language. You know, you can use any script. Now, languages like Kanuri, Hausa, Wolof, Manding, Kiswahili, use historically the Arab script called Ajami. You know, to write African languages written with Arab script. Just like you can write African languages with the Latin script. You see, You can do that sort of thing easily, because the script is just an instrument for rendering symbolic sounds
Yes.
into literate forms, readable literate forms.
Okay.
So you can do that. Now, the whole tradition of the Timbuktu manuscripts and so on, for example, are African languages which are written with the Arabic script. Now, Kiswahili happens to be like that. Also, even Afrikans in Southern Africa, in South Africa, the first scripts of Afrikaans were written with Arabic script because the Afrikaans language was the kitchen language. It was the language of the slaves of the Dutch, who they brought in from Indonesia, Malaysia, Batavia, as they called it in the days of Dutch colonialism.
Okay.
They brought them to the Cape, and they wrote Afrikaans as a pigeonized Dutch that they used in the kitchen. You see, and they wrote it with the Arabic script because they were Muslims.
Yes, yes.
You see, from Java and the archipelago of Indonesia.
Okay.
So that is Kiswahili is an African language.
Right. Okay.
And the work we've done, we harmonize the orthography, the spelling systems of the Bantu languages of East Africa.
Yes.
More specifically Tanzania, and it's very clear that with the same rules of spelling with the other Bantu languages, you write Kiswahili.
Yes.
Kiswahili is very popular in the area. It's spoken in eastern Congo,
yes,
Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya. A small, sizable group of even Congolese in the northeast also speak Kiswahili. And you would find even in South Sudan, some of the people can speak Swahili. So it's a very popular and very quickly expanding language in that part of Africa.
All right.
But remember what I say is that Africans are multilingual. You see, on the average, some work I did some years ago in both Namibia and Ghana showed that in the urban areas, which are becoming even more multilingual now than they were when I was a little boy. You see, the average is about 3 to 4 languages per person. Now, in that sort of situation, all these languages then are, as it were, home language or for the speakers. Now, what I say when I say that we have 13 to 15 core languages which are spoken by about 75 to 85% of African speakers as first, second, or third language speakers. You must always add that fact.
Right.
As first, second, or third language speakers.
Yes, sir.
75 to 85% of Africans will be able to speak at least 13 or 14 core languages.
Okay.
That's and so the challenge facing us, you see, when we talk about liberation is not just a political term. Liberation is not liberation at heart for a person is a cultural term also, very much so. And the cultural instrument for liberation is language.
Yes, yes, yes.
You cannot liberate a people if they are not in charge of their lives with their own languages.
Yes, yes, yes.
Everywhere you have a language of a minority or outsiders used by native peoples, you have a colonial situation or internal colonial situation or a neocolonial situation. Every time you see that in history, it's a colonial situation,
right,
or a situation of dominance by one group or the other.
Okay.
Tendai Mwari. Baba
Tendai
Kwesi,
Mwari.
give thanks for your continued discussion on languages and the importance, and now introducing it to the subject, which is what is the role of languages in African liberation. Now, many of us are living outside of Africa, what they call the Diaspora community, and there's always a big debate on what language should we choose to be the unifying language and linking us to Mama Africa. Now, I know for a long time Kiswahili has been the language that has been put forward as the biggest language spoken throughout Africa. Well, not necessarily throughout the biggest language spoken, but covering a number of different countries or nations. And that has been seen as a Pan-African language. What's your views on your thoughts on that?
Now, two things. I think you should be able to choose. And depending on where you fancy yourself as wanting to be able to interact with the people, to be able to stay, to be able to visit, to be able to circulate, you can choose any language. If you have good teachers for the language, you can choose, you can learn any language. That should be simple. But my suggestion also would be that for many of our people of African descent, of our people who are in the Caribbean and so on, it's important that the creoles are developed.
That's right.
Word
song.
There is no reason why the creole. There is no language which is from Adam unchanging. All languages are changing all the time. And the creoles are our languages also. The creoles are our languages. Bahasa, the language which is used in Indonesia now today, is an open creole. So the Afrikans here, it's a creole. Languages are hybrids all the time. Languages are adding, subtracting, mixing all the time. They are living things. They're changing all the time. So it's important that the creoles are developed, because if we do that, the important thing is that we empower the masses. We lift the masses. One leader here, Afrikaans leader some years ago, says, lift the language and you lift the people. Now, if you want to study Kiswahili, you should be able to study Kiswahili easily. The materials for Kiswahili are much more than you would find for many other languages. But so, I think it's a question of choosing, and it's a question of getting the expertise. These days, there are lots of experts in these things.
Right.
Now, we have also, there are lots of bilingual dictionaries, but the center I've run for the past 20 years now, we've developed 9 monolingual dictionaries, and lots of school books. You can access them on the website of CASA. So I would say get on with it. Get people to teach, get people to organize classes, and it's easy to do. It shouldn't be difficult at all. It doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Just a little bit of effort. Organizing it, finding the space, finding the goodwill with whoever is the teacher or the teachers, organizing it properly, and it should be possible to do it. It's very important, I think, for particularly our people in the diaspora, that the linkages with Africa, which emphasize, which they want, which we want, which they want to assert and affirm, can only be done through cultural patterns, like the names, like the rituals, culture is what will affirm the identity all the time, not color. Color is ephemeral, can disappear.
Baba?
But what goes on in your mind is what's important.
Tendai give thanks, Baba. Now, I'm sure you're aware that there are some groups or organizations or spiritual orders in places like the Congo that will say that the original language is a Congolese language. All the others are hybrids or breakaways, and we need to return back to the original, the source, if we really fully want to understand our language and our origins. What would you say to that?
No, that's I'm sorry to say that's nonsense. There's no language in the world which is unchanging. Language is always in evolution, always changing. The language of Adam doesn't exist except in mythology. Language is always changing, mixing, changing, absorbing, taking influences, discarding. Language is the history of peoples. It's changing all the time. So there's nothing like it. What there is that we know that the emergence of language is also the emergence of Homo sapiens sapiens.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings are the only animals which are talkative animals which talk. And that is one of the historically important junctions in the evolution of the primates, that we started talking. We started talking, and that's Homo sapiens, sapiens sapiens, the human being. Now, what we know from the genetic mapping that is being done currently in the world is that the variation you would find, the genetic variation you would find in all parts of the world will fit into different sections of the spectrum separately. But what you would find in Africa is everywhere, which means that humans started Africa and went out of Africa. What we furthermore know is that the crucible of this genetic variation, where it is widest geographically in the world, is in Africa, and it's in the border area between Angola and Namibia, in the Khoi and the San areas, in those areas. You see, there you have the greatest variety, genetic variation in the Genome Project, represented in a limited geographical area. So you can say that is where the appearance of Homo sapiens sapiens seems to have started. That you can say. But language is changing all the time. Any language that stands still is on the road to extinction. And language is changing continuously all the time, absorbing new influences, new words, lexically, structures, structural changes all the time.
All right. Give us Baba Kwesi. All right, but we're coming up to the end of our show, 10 minutes to go, just over. I really want to get into some of the practical implications of the work that you're doing, Baba Kwesi. We mentioned earlier a quote from you where you were saying that all the governments that you've spoken to basically agree with your premises and your research. They all agree with it, but none have the desire, the will to take it on and institutionalize it. Yeah? And so the question really is, that we're asking is, are there still any viable options for doing this on a governmental level? And if not, are there any other means of propagating this, what you are institutionalizing, your work, other than through government agencies?
Yes. Well, it's not my work. It's the work that I've done with other people It's not just me. All I have done is that I have coordinated the work. I've conceptualized the work and coordinated it. But the work has been done by over 150 linguists and academics scattered across universities across Africa. Professors from all the different countries in Africa. I work in. There are professors in all the different universities in Africa. They've done the work. I have just coordinated it. I have conceptualized it. I have organized them. But they have done the work. You see, that's one thing. With regards to the government, it's not altogether surprising that. You remember, Africa is a neocolonial area in the world at this stage, neocolonial parts. Now, the ruling groups in Africa are the ones which keep the neocolonial system going. It is not the Westerners. There are hardly any Westerners controlling everyday life in Africa. It is our elites, neocolonial elites, who linked to the former colonial powers, culturally, economically, politically, and otherwise. And they use these colonial languages in order to control our societies. You see, and they monopolize. They're privileged to use these colonial languages in order to maintain power. Now, if you tell them that, look, change the languages, it means change the basis of power. Right. You see? So, although they see the logic and understand the logic of it, it is often difficult for them to really make the sort of dramatic and radical moves that would ensure that the masses are empowered linguistically. You're telling the bird which is standing on the branch that it should cut the branch down. Now, the implications of what I'm saying are not very difficult to understand. It means you have to push harder. You have to confront. You may have to use other means in the end. But I know that the masses will not forever take the conditions of neocolonialism lying down. There will come a time when they would revolt against the neocolonialism.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Brother Leader Mbandaka wanted to say a word to you, Brother Kwesi, so we'll do that now. Tenamwari.
Yes, Tenamwari. I mean, this has been an outstandingly powerful insight that our Baba has been giving us on the importance of language and indeed the importance of our African culture and how crucial and indispensable these are to the liberation of our people and how neglected the process of reclaiming our culture and our languages are. Baba Kwesi, I'm going to ask you to allow us to celebrate your brilliance in this area. I'm going to ask you to allow us to celebrate the dedicated work that you have done. I'm going to ask you to allow us to amplify the importance of your role in advancing this very, very important agenda to unite the languages, the dialects of the African continent into a mono expression of our African consciousness and our African cultural identity. Allow us to celebrate you, Baba. There is no need for you to be modest. I know it's the African way, but there is really no need for you to be modest, Baba Kwesi, because we know that this agenda would not be where it is now except for your vital contribution to the process. So we know it's a collective process, but we also know that you have been an indispensable driving force in this process.
Indeed.
May we have your permission, Baba, to celebrate you as and when we have the urge. Tendai Mwari.
Well, thank you. If you think you have to do that. But remember that the work was done by me and my colleagues.
Oh, we do remember that, Baba. We do remember that.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
We do remember that.
All right. Unfortunately, we're coming up to the end of the show, Kings and Queens. There's so many more questions that I would love to ask and go into. Just to say, in relation to our last question, firstly, that we teach Yoruba at the at Mama Africa Culture Shop. Yeah, you can learn Yoruba there. Our academy teaches Yoruba, and Auntie, who's now forgetting, who runs the Afrikan Language School at the Art Center. Auntie Legit. How could I forget? Auntie Legit is they're teaching about 5 different African languages at the moment. 3 Yoruba, Swahili, I believe Amharic, and I'm pretty sure there's one other that I'm not mentioning. I'm forgetting. Wolof, probably, right? So this is a good start where we're beginning to institutionalize. Answering the last question in terms of how we go about this from a non-governmental standpoint, is grassroots. I myself, I'll let you know, Baba Kwesi, that in doing workshops, countless workshops on various different subjects, more often than not, I've included your research in my work, whether I'm teaching about Black history, the Black history or African-centered education. Just the importance of what you're doing as an example for how we develop ourselves is so very important. So it's about getting that word out there. So it's to finally, Baba Kwesi, we go into closing words, and just anything that is on your mind that you hasn't been shared so far in the show that you would like to close with and let our listeners know about. Also your contact details, and letting our listeners know where we can feed into the work of you and your colleagues from now on and in the future.
So, thank you. I'll say one last little thing, which is a quote from somebody else. But it says, the language of the conqueror in the mouth of the conquered is a language of slaves.
Yeah, word sound. Yes.
All right. Good. That keep it short. Brother Leader, this has been such an affirmation of the cultural nationalist perspective. Many demote cultural nationalism to what we wear and the names we have, yeah, and what we eat at home, Brother Leader. But I think that as people that are focused, Pan-Africanist, culturalists, nationalists, have really focused on the issue of language, even if we haven't had the wherewithal to institutionalize programs to resolve it, right? But yeah, just as in closing words now, in terms of what you've taken from the show and how, what is the role of language in African liberation?
Well, Tendai Moari, I think the awesome work that Baba Kwesi Prah has been doing for many years. And the
colleagues, probably. Don't forget the colleagues now.
Yeah, and his colleagues. Yeah, I've been doing for many years. It's important that as many of our people know about this work and can feed into the process of this work and how much how vital it is to our liberation. In this season of African liberation, the commemoration and the celebration of African Liberation Day, it's very, very important that we hear a message like this. As a movement, we have always valued the profound importance of language. This is why we open speech, close speech, and punctuate the power of the word with the words Tendai Moari, reclaiming the concept of the African deity, as well as ensuring that when we open our mouths, the first word that comes out of our mouth is in an African language. Yeah. It is it's embracing the principle of the need to reclaim our languages. This is why in our movement, our spiritual language is the Shona language of Zimbabwe. We have selected a language as our spiritual language, so we learn to pray and to conduct our rituals using our mother tongue. It is why in our Alkebu-Lan Academy of Excellence, or Saturday School, we have taught 2 languages. We used to teach 3, now we're teaching Yoruba, and getting our children to get their tongues around African words and to value their mother tongue, to recognize that and realize that they have a mother tongue, and to value that mother tongue. See, we understand language to be more than just words that we say for social communication. It's much deeper than that. It is the expression of a people's collective expression of their very souls. And it's informed by thousands of years of physical or physio-spiritual and psychosocial evolution.
Yes.
Thousands of years in context with our natural environment. So the language tells a story of our origin. It tells a story of our evolution. It's deep. It's very, very deep, and it is how nature itself has shaped our psyche, our collective psyche as a people, and shaped our tongue to give expression of our own worldview. I do want to say one quick thing before we close. Within our movement, we see race and culture as synonymous, because we see race as our physiological evolution as a people, and therefore our identity, our physical identity, collective physical identity as a people. But we see culture as the collective behavioral identity of our people, the indigenous behavioral identity as a people. When African people begin to imbibe the character, the characteristics and personality of Arabs and Europeans, we are actually mimicking our conquerors. We are mimicking our conquerors. And that does not make their culture our culture. We're just a conquered people who are expressing ourselves in the cultural vessel of other people. So we see culture as the racial identity as vital as cultural identity. And as much as we should be proud of our culture and reclaim our culture and express that culture, we must also be proud of our race or racial identity, and express that racial identity with absolute pride. But claim it as much as we claim our culture. So with that, I want to close with the words of the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, as we hail our elder Baba Kwesi Prah for the powerful knowledge and wisdom he shared with us this evening. Let us evoke the spirits of the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who summons us to unite, organize now or perish. Rise, you mighty African people, for you can accomplish whatever you will. Africa, to the God of Africa be the glory. Tendai Mwari.
Kings and Queens. So many questions that we didn't get to ask. We didn't even get to ask about China in Africa. We didn't get to ask about Chinua Achebe.
We can always have the Baba on again, you know. I'm sure Baba, he would want to come back on. And
Baba Kwesi Prah, thank you very much. And do indeed expect the call from us again. We do want to interact with you again and flesh out some of these issues more. For people that want to read Baba Kwesi's work, Anthropological Prisms is one, Soundings is another, and Tracing Pan-Africanism and the Challenges of Global African Unity is another, Kings and Queens, among many, many titles. Yes, and once again, Kings and Queens, Baba Kwesi will be over here for the Saturday the 10th of June Marcus Garvey Memorial Lecture, as hosted by the Pan-African Society Community Forum, Birkbeck University, London, room B3, Kings and Queens. And we as some of you may know, this date clashes actually with the Ancestors and Elders Day put on by Galaxy Radio, Kings and Queens. So when we say clash, there's no real clash. It's just one unified vibration, Kings and Queens. Just two different events. You know what I'm saying? So if you are not with Galaxy, be with the Pan African Society Community Forum for the Marcus Garvey Annual Memorial Lecture with Baba Kwesi Prah, and you'll hear a lot more about what he was dropping today, Kings and Queens. Phenomenal elder. Tune in next week as we take a trip to Jamaica to speak to Ras Miguel Lawn. Yesterday, Kings and Queens, we finally got the interview. It's pre-recorded this time, so you know, so we have it. Yeah? So we have it. So you're going to air that next week, Monday, as we continue to talk it straight and make it plain. So tune in then. Tomorrow, Kings and Queens, down at Mama Africa Culture Shop, the African Spirituality Study, we will be dealing with the Congo tradition, as taught by Vuvamu. Brother Nekunda and Laba. Next up, Kings and Queens, it is SG Vibes. We look forward to seeing you next week. Around there we say,
Tendai Mwari.